You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, on the Friday Sports Show, bringing you all the latest news around the globe, around the country and around the area, with the goal is to increase sports participation and also awareness of what goes on around the world. We bring you guests from all around the world, and we bring you guests in the local area as well. Obviously the team we get behind is Salford, and they're doing relatively well this season for their first season in the in league football. But this evening's guest, we've got a really fascinating guest because he's played football in different leagues, and also he'll be able to give us perspective of what it's like to play football in different leagues, but also at the very highest level as well, which will be a fascinating insight into what it takes to play. And I think one thing is reaching the top level, but it's another thing staying there for a consistent period of time. We see a lot of players these days. Just the other week, we heard on radio, Phil Foden over at Man City, and people talking about whether he should go or should he hang around. And the thing is, he's only still a young lad, and for me, I've made my sentiments clear. It's about sort of knuckling down and seeing what he can do. But it'll be interesting to see what someone who's been there and does that and done that perspective on things, going forward. But Micah Hyde, who you're probably familiar with, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Good afternoon, Jimmy. Great to be here, mate.
Fantastic. So, we sort of are very fortunate on this show to have guests across a broad range of areas, athletes at the highest level and different people at different levels. And yourself, you played at the very highest level, and you remember you playing for Watford. I know that most people will probably know you for playing at Watford, but you obviously spent time at other teams too, and we'll talk about that on the show. But was it a start from the beginning, Mikey? I believe you started at Cambridge before you would move on. And what was it like at Cambridge when you were first starting out?
It was really interesting at the time. There, John Becklin, who was the manager, the first team manager, and John Beck's a good manager, but played a particular style of play, so it was a bit of an awakening for me, to tell you the truth. So that was interesting. I left London and I went up there, done 6 months, got a shift, and I ended up getting pro. I probably wouldn't have made it up there if I didn't have a understanding about what I had to actually do.
Yeah.
And from a young age, I understood what I was meant to be doing on the football pitch, if that made sense.
Yes.
That came from probably my father. So from a young age, I used to go and play football from a young child, and I used to play, and he used to always say to me, there's only one football, there's 22 of you on a pitch, and that stuck with me from a young age. So I knew that from whatever I was doing, I had to give it my best, because there was other people trying to give their best, so I had to really knuckle down and compete, so I understood that from a young age.
Yeah.
So then I played in a particular kind of way, so it was a little bit different from what Cambridge was playing at the time, first team. But I was able to adjust because of the knowledge of understanding what I needed to do myself. So I had a lot of self-conviction and a lot of self-belief.
Yes, that's really interesting you say, and it's a recurring theme on the show. We speak to different athletes and sports people, footballers, and that self-belief is crucial, really. My understanding is that you would go out on loan, and for me, we've seen a few players from England go out on loan in recent times, the likes of Sancho. We've seen players go out, established professionals like Smalling play for Roma now. For yourself, a young lad, to go out to Finland, what was that experience like? It must have been a massive experience to get out there and play in a foreign country.
Yes, in hindsight, it was a massive experience, and it was a very productive experience for me. But at the time, it was very daunting. Imagine I just signed a professional contract. My first pre-season as a pro, the man just called me in the office and said to me, "Micah, I want you to go and play in Finland." I left the office crying. But my mum and dad had said, the man just shipping me off to Finland. He doesn't want me. But he assured me that if I go out there, and once I come back, I don't need to do pre-season. I'll come back and I'll make the captain. And it did just that. So for my own personal journey, my own personal pathway, it was a tremendous thing for me as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old to go and play in there. I think it was championship qualifiers for a Finnish team, so for me it was a tremendous learning curve and experience. I then brought it back into my game over here domestically. Just touching on
Yeah.
People like Smalling that's gone out on loan. So there's two ways you can go out on loan. You can go out on loan because you ain't getting game time. Smalling's an example. Maybe Man United want it, maybe they don't. I don't know. But he's gone out on loan because he needs game time. Foden's a different circumstances for me. I think he's at a club where the manager wants to play a certain way and he wants his players to develop in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so if he went to a different club, he's going to develop the way that the actual manager of Man City wants him to play. I think he's surrounded by very, 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 very good players.
Yeah.
David Silva's coming to an end of his time. So would it be any point in Phil Foden going out to play? No, to me, there's no point in going out alone because at the end of the season, he's going to probably be hopefully the long-term replacement for David Silva. So it'd probably be better off him staying where he is and learning every day from the man and the manager that he's got there. So I think it's slightly different for him. I've heard it, you talk about the media and he's got to go and get minuscule experience. I'm not sure if he really needs to go out alone in that particular example.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's my sentiments too, Mike. I mean, the difference is obviously for yourself. You've been there, done that, and people listening to what you've got to say because you've been there, you've been on loan as a youngster under different circumstances. And for me, it's the same sentiments. I think if you're playing in a team with those sort of players, the manager spoke highly of him every week as well, and you think you just knuckle down and your time will come. But that's one of the issues we've got. And I think for me, no doubt it was the same possibly when you were sort of starting up, but for me I don't know if there's sort of a change in the times, but certain young players now they sort of want it all like today type thing, and it's about abiding your time as well, and just digging in there and seeing how things go. And have you sort of noticed the change? Is that just my sort of perception, anecdotal perception, or?
No, I don't think that's your perception at all. I think that's the culture. I think that the culture's changed slightly over here for sure. Football culture, 100%. Nothing stands still forever. But that perception of we need to go and play, we need to get minutes. I think that perception is still there. I don't think there's any great rush for him for Foden to go out and get minutes. They've got a cultural thing here that if they're young and they do more, they've got to be taken to the next level straight away. I don't agree with that. Yeah. I think if you're young and doing really well as an under 21, then stay in the under 21s and boss the under 21s, really boss the under 21s. Instead of being talked about getting into the full squad. I see Tammy and the other centre half at Chelsea. I see they're going to be called up into the senior squad. Outstanding achievement. Don't get me wrong, very fantastic for them and their family and for Chelsea. Brilliant recognition. That said, there's other countries that I study and I watch their play, and I watch them in Spain and Germany and the Holland. You watch them, of course, a period, and you watch the young players. They go through a slower transition until they get into the full national team. They go through a transition of the youth team and dominating there, and they go through they dominate, and then they go into the national team. Our culture is a bit, you do well, you're great, and you're going to go to the next level straight away. And it can be a little bit harmful all the time, but it can have a detrimental effect when we're rushing our youngsters to go to the next level yet when they maybe not physically prepared, psychologically prepared, socially prepared for that next level. Do you understand? And maybe a little bit of time they can really have more of a lasting effect. So I think over here that culture still remains the same. It was still the same when I was going through, when players were playing at a certain level because they played for certain clubs, they got pushed on quicker. So I think it's not a perception of yours. I think that is, I believe it's still a little bit of that culture still remaining in this country for sure.
Yeah, and absolutely. It's an interesting perspective, and I mean, obviously for yourself, you'd gone out to Finland, and from my reckoning, it obviously worked out for you. Looking at things from the outside in, you came back and got a good move to Watford. It's always been a traditionally strong team, and what was it like to sort of come back and sort of get taken on by Watford? That would have been an incredible experience, I would think.
Yeah, it was a really good experience. I remember the time I was pretty young and I was playing, and I was fortunate to captain the team, and I was probably the youngest captain in the country at the time for any professional club at the time. So there was a bit of interest in that, and so it was an exciting time. I remember speaking to a couple of clubs, but I didn't go and physically speak to them. But Watford, I decided to go and sit down and spoke to Graham Taylor at the time. Yeah. And then I spoke to Graham. It was the first club I spoke to. And after I spoke to Graham, I didn't speak to anyone else. I mean, I didn't feel like I needed to. There was other clubs I needed to speak to, but because how he spoke and how he knew so much about my game, I just ended up signing for Watford, and thankfully it worked out a good relationship, to be fair, because we went on and we done at my period at the time, I mean, we went on and we done pretty well. So
Yeah.
It was really good.
That's really interesting that you say, Mike, because I mean, from the outside looking in, it looked like the players had a lot of respect for Graham Taylor, and obviously from an international perspective, I think he got some unfair press at the time. It's just football is that way. England job's a tough job for anybody, and it's not easy, international football. But what was it like to sort of play under him in terms of from what I could see, the players seemed to really take to him. Was that the sort of case? What was you like to sort of play under as a player?
Uplifting, probably the first word that comes into mind. He was an uplifting manager. He was very good. So Graham was a person that wasn't really too much into just getting on the grass and telling us tactically what to do and tactically what to do. He wasn't that kind of manager. He was a manager that was more into the mental side of things. One, believing in oneself, having the capability to be better than someone, having the belief to be better than someone. So he was very much of a deep thinker, a psychological manager. And he ended up being a psychologist in my time there as well. But for someone like me, he was like a breath of fresh air, because I was already, that sort of belief was already intrinsic in me. That sort of understanding, well, I want to be better than you anyway. That was already in me as a young person, because like I said, that manifested within me from my father. When he used to take me to football and said to me, come on, be effective in this game, not just be a participant. So Graham was very much like that. So when I went to Watford and spoke to Graham, I said, this is the kind of manager I like to play under, because he has the belief that it's not about the ability, it's about one's belief that one's person to be better than someone else, not your ability. No one's born with more ability than anyone else.
Yeah.
If you've got more desire and you really want to do something, you're capable of achieving it. So he was that sort of manager. So for me, as a player, it was great, because I believed that myself. I didn't really believe that anyone was a great player or really, really special. When I was playing, I didn't believe that. I still don't really believe that. I think Messi is an exception. I think all the rest of us are all the same at different levels, don't get me wrong, but I don't think anyone's born with a particular special talent. I wanted to, like I said, you got your Messi and you got the people in the world that are capable of doing things that we can only think of, obviously, but I think they're better to work here as well, to be fair, to some extent. Graham was like that. Wasn't a manager for coaching, he was a manager for getting in your mind, making you believe that you can be what you want.
Interesting time at the time in English football, because it was roughly about I think 96, 97. We had the likes of Wenger come over as well, and he started to incorporate the psychology of the game too, and bringing in new methods and training methods. But I mean, even prior to Wenger, there obviously there was a sort of movement towards the sports science side of things to look at in view of that. In terms of yourself, Michael, when did you sort of notice in your own career that things were changing in the game in terms of science would have a big influence in terms of how you prepare for the game, how you eat, how you look after yourself, and all that sort of stuff?
Probably about 3-4 years when I signed for Watford. Probably 3-4 years after I signed for Watford, things started to change. Like I said, Graham brought in a psychologist, which was new to us. Then, so I'm not 43 now. How old must have been? I'll say, I can't quite put my finger on the actual year, but I know 3 or 4 years into my career at Watford that I started seeing changing dietaries, changing the bar. So what they were stocking in the bar after games, like the players' bar, stopped selling alcohol. Watford, they stopped selling alcohol. We started getting a psychologist. They started changing our diet. So I started seeing the evolution of football while I was playing. Now the youngsters that come into it now, it's the norm for them to have psychology.
Absolutely,
and heart rate monitors and so on and so forth. But in my time, when we first started, that was unheard of. Get up, go and play, get trained, and then that's it. Now, especially with the introduction of things that happen once you finish playing, I think it's been more made prevalent that we get people in to talk about things outside football to help us become better footballers. The career is very short, and you could be left with a hollow feeling once you finish if you haven't had the kind of support along the way. So I think that's a good introduction to this.
No, that's an interesting take, and definitely want to touch on that as well at some point to sort of discuss that, because obviously, that's a really important point. I mean, Watford at the time, Micah, they were a tough team. I mean, people listening will probably remember, no doubt, they were a tough team to play against. I mean, the sort of team that, you're in for a game, and is that the sort of perception that you had in terms of, I mean, you guys, seem to play with no real fear, irrespective of who you played. Was that the sort of vibe at the club at the time, where you went out there, because you definitely you were a tough team to play, that's for sure. Was that something that sort of you felt you could go to any team and be competitive and get a result?
100% at the time. 100%. We was confident. We weren't the most talented. By far we wasn't the most talented. So we would beat teams that had on paper more talented players, but our team spirit was unbelievable, and we thought that we could beat anyone. And we did at a period, because we got back-to-back promotions, but that was all down to belief, nothing to do with really the tactical, technical side of things.
Yeah.
That was purely down to belief and the strength of the group. We felt that we was kind of unstoppable, and we used to roll teams over without really looking too pretty, to be honest with you, just through our team spirit. And we just got on the pitch. And it's like every football club. There's no football club in the world that everybody gets on off the pitch. Not everybody gets on off the pitch.
Yeah.
We were the same, so we didn't all get on off the pitch, but on the pitch we all did our jobs. We did what we had to do, and everyone had to be accountable for what they was doing. That was the difference at the time.
I mean, you guys had obviously yourself, and you had some big characters in the team, and how important do you think that is, to have people who sort of impose themselves on the pitch. I think sometimes in the game these days, you get teams who've got talented players, but sometimes feel that certain players don't really impose themselves. But you guys obviously had some big characters, and did you feel that at the time, that sort of when you sort of stepped on, that you had some really big characters around you?
Yeah, I did, for sure. I did. But I had people playing that took responsibility, that took on the responsibility of the position they was playing in. You see some games now and you think, wow, there's no leaders, but the leadership has to come in with understanding your role in the team. And then once you understand what your actual role in the team is, then you go out and do it. Therefore, you can lead the team where you're displayed. So we had several players that knew that. Like I said, we had several players that knew their responsibility in the team and accountabilities. They played in a certain position, they played that position. Then it reverberates for the whole team, and then that's how it was in my time. So we had several leaders, if that made sense.
Yeah.
In my team, there wasn't one particular person that you called a leader. I think you got to be a bit mindful of the word leadership as well, because leadership can be served in different ways. You can have a person that's quiet and can lead. So we had players in the team that were really understood their jobs, and with that responsibility. So when people wasn't doing their jobs, it stood out. So we could actually, as a team, collectively say, well, come on, you got to be part of this, because we know what we're doing. So it was a really good time in Watford like that, really. That was a good thing, and I think as a professional sports person, ex-professional sports person, I think there's only maybe once, if you're lucky, you can be in a team sport, if you're in a team sport, and be in a team where the team has a purple moment. I mean, I was in a team that had a purple moment that done really well together, and I don't think them kind of opportunities come around too much.
Yeah.
Even if you're a top player, the only person I think that's happened is Ronaldo, who's gone everywhere, scored everywhere, won everything. Even the top players maybe only have a time in their period where they've been in the team, and that 4 good years or maybe 1 year or 2 years. I was fortunate enough to have probably several with Watford at that time.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I think that obviously you were instrumental to the team, and when you think Watford in that era, you think of players like yourself, and I think in terms of other teams you would play, were there certain players that who were some of the toughest players you think you'd played against? Obviously, you played in an era where there were some tough players. I think the times have changed in that respect. That's for sure. I mean, there was week in, week out, the intensity obviously would have been high. But who were some of the top competitors that you came up against, Micah?
I can't remember. I played against all of them. As far as the ones that we know, when I say all of them, I mean in my period, obviously. As far as Premiership, so your Kings, I'm talking about people in my position, Vieiras, Gerrards, the Skulls, and all of them were very, very, very good players. All of them. very, very good players, better than me. So I would still say they were great, but they were better than me. But when I get asked this question, there's only one player that really sticks in my mind that I had the hardest game on, and that was Lee Hendry.
Wow.
Lee Hendry, he ran everywhere. He had the hardest game because I never touched the ball. I never touched it because he was running everywhere. So when people ask me this question and I tell them what the answer is and I told them why, they're very surprised. It wasn't because he was technically good or he sprayed passes and ran themselves with the ball. Because he ran up and down the whole game and he made the game so hard for me. It was the least enjoyable, hardest game I've ever played as a midfielder. Just chasing this guy around. And not being able to be on the ball as much as I would have liked. So the answer to that question would have been Hendry, only because the energy he had in that game properly wore me out.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for the young, any young players listening to the show this evening. We've got different players and who listen to the show as well, and it shows that if you sort of got a good engine and you've got good physical ability, it's a great point you've made there. It's like a learning thing for them, and I think people are going to think of the obvious players that you've played against and think, but it's a fascinating point because it shows young players that how important it is to keep yourself in good shape and all that sort of stuff really. So it's an interesting one that. And moving to the international career, you had a distinguished international career. You played for Jamaica. I remember the call up when I remember watching on. I can't remember the game what it was now, but I remember like the call up. But in terms of yourself, at what point did you decide, Micah, to play for Jamaica? Was it a conscious choice you were going to go down that road? What sort of influenced your decision? And tell us about the experience. What it was like to play for them?
My decision to play for Jamaica was delayed, and it was delayed by Graham. Jamaica asked me to play, I think, 18 months before I actually made my debut. At the time, I sat down with my parents and I said to them, I want to play. I sat down with Graham, and Graham said to me, Michael, look, that opportunity is a fantastic opportunity. We just got promoted to the Prem, and he said to me, I would really like you to concentrate playing in the Prem, and I decided to do that. So when I did actually make my debut, it was delayed. So the excitement of actually playing for them was still there, don't get me wrong, but it was sort of delayed because I had turned down the opportunity to play for them before. Not for those selfish reasons, but for selfish reasons, because I wanted to concentrate on my career, nothing more than that. But actually playing for Jamaica was a tremendous honour, a great honour, a great honour to be able to represent your country to play against other people from different countries is the pinnacle of probably a footballer's career anyway. I think you don't get no higher than that. Your country. So really proud moment for me, and a really extremely proud moment for my family.
Because you guys had a good team too, a decent team.
A decent team.
Really competitive, and to sort of see on paper some of the players you had, I thought you're a game. You're going to be tough opposition for any team really. And what were some of the highlights playing for Jamaica? To play international football, it must be a phenomenal feeling that very, very few people will experience in a lifetime. But what were some of the highlights playing international football?
Scoring. Scoring was one of the highlights for sure. Qualifying for the actual World Cup was a highlight.
That was amazing, wasn't it? Yeah,
that was amazing. That was amazing. So they've had lots and lots of highlights. One thing I would have liked for them to have done at the time was to probably infrastructure, to grow an infrastructure to make it a bit more solid going forward. But there were so many highlights. The two that really stand out obviously was qualifying for the World Cup, Jamaica did, and scoring. And I scored. We played off Salford during the qualifier, and I scored. That was my first goal, so that was really, really, really good. So they were probably the two highlights of my career.
It's pretty amazing. To think to qualify for the World Cup, and so you guys would have been in the is it the CONCACAF group with America and Mexico and
Mexico, yeah.
Wow, man, that is
tough. Mexico was good as well. They were tough, and you had to go to Mexico at altitude. So Mexico was a tough component.
Gee, to think that you got through in a group. Obviously, Mexico have always been traditionally, a good team. They've always competitive. They've made the quarterfinals of World Cup and been there and thereabouts. The likes of America at the time, did you play them as well, Mike? Did you get to play against the United?
We did. I personally didn't. The team did, but I didn't play for them. Or did I? I can't remember to be honest. I may have. Yeah, I did. We played in Kingston, which would have been our home ground at the time. So we played against them. There was a couple players playing in England at the time. Rayner,
Of course. That's right, yeah.
Lorena played, the one in Mitchell, he played, and there was a couple of others. Donovan, I think, was there.
Yeah,
I think he was at Everton at the time, if I remember rightly. I can't quite remember, but yeah, we did play America. And again, it was a good experience.
Yeah. That's an amazing experience. And I mean, when you get to the World Cup, what was the experience like? I mean, it must have been really, exciting to be at the World Cup, and you turn up and you see players around you that they are the pinnacle of the game, of the sport, and what was the experience like to be? I mean, did you guys think you get to the World Cup? What were you sort of? Did you believe that you could sort of cause a few upsets, or what was the mindset going into the tournament?
I didn't actually go to the World Cup because I didn't play in that qualifying round. I didn't go in. That's the one that I decided not to get involved in. And they went to the World Cup. I played in the next qualifying round.
Of course, yeah.
Make it. But speaking to the guys that did go, that was in the same squad when I come back, they said it was an amazing few people like Paul Hall and who else went? Marcus Gill went, Paul Hall went, Deaton Burton went, I think Frank went. So there's several players that played in the team. When they come back, they told me about the experience they had.
Wow.
That I'd missed out on. But, they told me it was a great experience.
Yeah.
One that I haven't had myself, but I could imagine how great it must have been.
Yeah, but I mean, to have played like obviously, I think it was 17 caps or so you played for. Yeah. I mean, that's an incredible achievement. I mean, obviously, to play at that level, it's everyone's dream to play at that level, and very few people get to do that. In terms of Watford, what would you say? I mean, you guys experienced obviously a lot of success, while you were there. What were some of the highlights at Watford?
Oh, there was loads. I say loads. I say loads because we got promoted a couple of times. So during the course of the season, there would have been lots of highlights. The highlight for me would have been probably, other than the actual winning, the highlight for me would have been seeing the new methods of the way that football had changed and it was evolving at the time. Like I said, with the introduction of the sports science, with the introduction of psychologists, I think that was a highlight for me because I believed in that. I believed in these things when they started to get introduced. I really did buy into it. So I was glad to see that. That was a highlight for me as far as my career is concerned. But my whole period at Watford was a highlight, and there's not many things I can really say, that was really good.
Yeah.
Probably one that really stands out is we played Bolton in the playoffs. We played Bolton to get into the playoffs at home, and my son was born, I think, the next day, and I scored.
Wow.
We done the celebration, like the baby celebration. It was in a paper, and I still got a clip now, and I showed him it. So that was probably a very, very, very good highlight for me.
Incredible, yeah. And to think at the moment in Bolton, the way things have gone, unfortunately, they're not too far away from us here, and it looks like they've got stability now. So hopefully they can stabilise themselves. But Watford at the moment, what do you make of Watford now? I mean, last season they play really, really well. This season a little bit indifferent. And what are your thoughts like looking from your perspective? You've been there. And
last season, I was a little bit concerned at the back end of last season. I was concerned. The back end of last season, I went to the cup final when they faced Man City, and I said before I went to cup final, all I hope is, because I'm not sure if Watford's going to win, because Man City are very good. They might win because it's a game of football, but Man City are very good. All I hope is they don't get battered by a lot of goals.
Yeah.
Because before that game, they had not won a Premiership game in 3. So they were going into the game, the FA Cup game against Man City, having not won in 3 games for the last Premiership game. So they ended the Premiership season poorly, and then they finished the season getting beat by Man City, I think 6-0 at the time. So
that's right, yeah.
I was concerned about their form at the back end of last season anyway. I was a bit concerned about this not winning for 3 games and then getting beat the way they got beat by Man City. I was a little bit concerned, hoping that this season will be a new season and they'll start fresh, but they didn't. So like I said, what's happened with Watford, at how they currently going at the moment, I was sort of scared for the back end of last season because they didn't perform well at the back end of last season, and then they started this new campaign, got new players, but they were doing the same thing, not winning. So I just hope that the new manager comes in, or the new old manager comes in, can turn things around and get some stability back into the place, and we can start picking up some points. And so basically, I say now retaining their position in the Premiership. So that's what I hope will happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's. I keep my fingers crossed for that, because Watford, all the teams that I play for, I support all of the teams I used to play for, and Watford obviously I support them.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Watford, I mean, obviously, your career at Watford would sort of come to an end as a player, and you'd moved to Burnley. What was that like? That would have been another big move, I would think, in terms of the change, a whole different style of football, a different environment. How did that sort of pan out, Micah, the move to Burnley?
I was meant to when our contract was running out. I was in my last year at Watford. Probably not really performing too well. I had a little niggle. My last year was my worst year at Watford. I had a little niggle, so I didn't play many games. Where previously in the last 7 years I played loads of games, and that was the only time I had a little bit of injury. Crystal Palace was meant to come in for me. They were divvying. Nothing happened. Steve Cottrell phoned me and said to me, can we have a conversation? I spoke to him. Went up to Burnley, and I tell you, living in Manchester was one of the greatest times of my, not just my life, my family's life. I took my family went up there, and I was brilliant. Manchester was absolutely, playing for Burnley was brilliant. And I lived in Manchester, and the whole area up there, so warm. The people are so warm and so kind, so friendly. It was just a nice period in my life to be playing for Burnley. At the time when I signed, we only had 9 players as well.
Wow.
I was interested in. We had a good team. I played with some very good players at Burnley. They had a good team in that first season. They had a really, really good team. But the experience of actually going to live at Manchester was absolutely brilliant. Not just for me, like I said, for my family. It was really good. I'll go back and live at Manchester. So that's how much I enjoyed it.
Wow.
Playing for Burnley at the time, good moments, good times.
Yeah, because Burnley's always been a sort of club that's, I would say, sort of punched above their weight, so to speak, in terms of, there's clubs that are similar size and stature who probably don't consistently put a team out, week in, week out. I mean, you know what you're going to get at Burnley. Did you get the feeling at the time that, the Burnley team, I mean, we look at them now, they're in the Premiership and, they've done really, really well. What was the vibe at the time? I mean, from the point of view, what were your thoughts on the size of the club, Michael? Was it in terms of the club itself? Did you feel you were playing for a club that obviously you'd been at Watford, you sort of got to the highest level, and what was the sort of feeling at Burnley in terms of the size and stature of the club?
Burnley's a big club. Burnley's got the most fans. Correct me if I'm wrong, or someone may correct me if I'm wrong. They've got the most fans in the country per the area, so something like that. They've got the most fans that support the team within one area. So there's no other club that's got a club in their area and everyone supports it. So Burnley was a big club. Well, you might not think it as a Londoner before I went there, but as I got there, I got told in no uncertain terms how big the club is and how passionate the fans are. So it's a really, really good club to play for. It's a really passionate club. The fans are really passionate and they're honest as the day's long. And I just love playing there. But before I went there, I didn't realise that obviously until I got there. Then when I got there, I realised that, oh wow, it's really, 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 really passionate. I think, I'm not sure if they are or if they're not, but there's so many clubs up around near Burnley that football was the only thing going on at the time when I went up there. There's so many clubs so close to Burnley, like several clubs. So everyone's fighting to get their own identity, and Burnley was definitely a club that had their own identity, mate, for sure.
Absolutely.
They've left their own stamp and their own brand and their own culture up there.
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. And in the area, you've got a number of clubs. You've got the obviously the Manchester clubs, but you've also got the likes of Bolton, Blackburn, Rochdale. Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, precisely, a lot of clubs, and one of the clubs I'm helping out at the moment, a non-league club, is right next door to Burnley, Bake-Up, and you do feel and do sense that the club means a lot to the fans. And I think, like you said, sometimes at least from the outside looking in, people don't realise until they go to the club just how well supported the club is, and how the fans get behind the club. And in terms of from a player perspective, how important is that, Mikey? You got the fans, behind the players, and in recent times we've seen a lot of, there's been different fans, and obviously different clubs have got different fans, and but how important is it? Do you think that the fans get behind the players, and do you feel that as a player yourself when the fans are on board? Or
it's important for the fans to be on board, but the fans don't need to come on board. The fans will only be on board if you're winning, if you're doing well. Not even so much if you're winning, but you seem to be perceived to try to win and giving up your best. So really, to get the fans on board, it's down to the players and the manager, really. The fans pay their money to come and watch. So if you're going to play poorly, the fans are going to get on your case. That's normal. That's the industry we're in as professionals.
Yeah.
So to get fans on your side, you've got to understand you've got to do your job first and foremost, and then with that, hopefully the team start winning or win. Once you do that, the fans will be inside. That's at any club. If you're at a club and you're not performing, the clubs they're going to be on your case. You're making mistakes after mistakes. Yes, it's going to hinder your confidence, but you're going to have to be the one to get the fans on your side.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, the clubs I play for, I hope the fans was on my side, because I hope I gave them something for them to be on my side and be on the team side. But yeah, I think fans are like that all up and down the country. If you're not playing well, they're going to be on your case. They pay their money to come and watch.
Absolutely.
If you're doing well, they're going to love you. And Burnley is no different.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, I have this conversation with players, Mike. I've had this conversation with players, and different players, sort of have different perceptions. And for me, I agree. If the fans pay their money and they enjoy the game and they're entitled to the opinion, but I just think sometimes, from my perspective, there's a sort of line sometimes that gets crossed. Which is not good, really. Sometimes, I'm all for fans sort of, venting the frustration, fine, and having worked with teams myself. I've never had an issue with them, commenting on the performances. It's just when it gets a bit personal, really. I think that there's that sort of line. Some different players handle it differently. Some players can handle it, don't get as affected, but obviously, some, it can be tough, really. Do you think yourself that maybe have things changed, or have they always been that way, where you're always going to get the minority of fans, whatever the reason, they sort of tend to cross that sort of that line, and and sort of some of the chants you hear and that sort of stuff, and some of the things that they do, I don't think is a good thing. And in terms of your experience, what would you say in terms of your experiences, and you're sort of you're a strong character, and you mentioned there it's about getting the fans on your side, but is there a line that you think that shouldn't be crossed, or what's your take on that?
Absolutely, there's a line that shouldn't be crossed. Whether you're thick-skinned or not thick-skinned, no person should be abused personally about anything that's in their personal life. No footballer, nobody, because it's a form of bullying, isn't it? It's a form of harassment. It's a form of, so we don't want that. No one should do that. But the only the people that are in control of that, controlling a mass crowd of people. And within that mass crowd of people are saying derogatory things. There's chants coming from that big section of a crowd. The people that are in charge of that crowd are the people that own that club. And above that, the people in charge of them are the governing body. So we're not getting people. So for me, it's about taking responsibility and accountability. So if you've got people chanting homophobic, racist, personal, sexist, for any kind of anything that's derogatory, and it happens too often, it's got to be down to the people that the governing body to deal with them people. We as normal sports people, we just got to play our game and endure. But no one should have to endure. That's my point. I don't think any thick skin, whether you're sentimental or not, no one should have to endure personal abuse. And if the abuse is coming from a section of a crowd, then there must be a governing body in charge of that crowd.
Absolutely.
The club, and then after the club, it's the actual FA, it's the governing body, and they have to come down. And we're seeing now in society that these governing bodies are still not doing their jobs properly to minimise or eradicate it. So we're going to have this conversation possibly in another year's time with someone else. Hopefully not, but this is the conversation that might be had again in a year's time, because people that are in charge of these groups of people, when I say in charge, I mean they're let them through the door. They're the ones not in charge of their life, obviously, but they've let them through into the door of the stadium. If they can identify a crowd of people that's doing it, they should deal with them. If they can't, the governing body should deal with the people that set them inside the stadium. That's what I believe. That's my opinion.
No, that's a great opinion. I think that yourself, who sort of played at the highest level in international football, and you've been at a number of different teams, and I think it's important for players, former players as well, like yourself, to mention that, because for me, what's the frustrating thing is that people say things, but things need to be done. Action's got to be taken, and I think that there is definitely that sort of line that. And then the thing that amazes me, Micah, sometimes is that you look around the stadium and there's always like a perception or stigma as to who. I mean, some of these people doing some of these things. They're people who work in professional jobs, and they've got kids of their own, and that's not. I'm saying it's right to do it without, but I just find it sort of appalling and disgusting that people, if it were their children playing. How would they like, people reacting that way? And there's got to be a way to sort of, educate these people. And I think that the problem lies, it is a problem of society, that's for sure. But you made a really good point. It's, people who, for me, I think, and this is, purely my opinion, I think sometimes the powers that be, alleviate themselves of responsibilities and sort of, there's a lot of passing the buck that goes on, and until people sort of say, it's not going to be tolerated, whatever it is. It's just going to keep going on. And at the moment, I think that, it's been brewing a bit in some of the European leagues where things aren't as, things aren't as probably as controlled as they are here. But you can see it brewing here too now. And I think sometimes, I just... From what I see, sometimes, one media plays off the other media, and you say, well, this is happening in this country, but we've got to look closer to home, and people are very naive to think it doesn't go on in this country. It does, and people like yourself who've played the game at the highest level, we see it week in, week out. But obviously, there's no simple solutions to complex problems. But what do you force yourself in terms of what could be done more? I mean, what could be done more? I mean, obviously, do bring in bans? Is there any way around, letting people into the game?
I think if you're going to abuse someone and you want to abuse someone, so an abuser's going to look for an arena to abuse. That's what an abuser's going to do. Look for someone where they can go and abuse. So if you take away that arena for someone to go and abuse, one, they'll go somewhere else and carry on abusing, or two, they might check their behaviour. I hope it's the latter. So if you've got someone, people that continually or fans in a particular stadium that are notorious or keep doing the same thing over and over again, for me the first thing is to play games behind closed doors. Them fans, the people that are causing the trouble, yes, it's going to affect the ones that do not cause no trouble, but hopefully the message will get across. And so what I'm saying is, what should happen, hopefully I would like to see happen, is the actual fans of clubs then start managing themselves to an extent, because if they're not going to be able to watch games, they might start saying, well, who are these people? We don't want them part of our club no more. They might start taking ownership and start policing themselves to an extent, because they're going to be not allowed to watch games. So if you've got a club that keeps doing anti-phobic chanting, just ban them. Play games behind closed doors. Play games behind closed doors. Play games behind closed doors. That's what I think should happen. Yeah. That means the players get to play and do their jobs, and they get to and the team that doing it, they're going to get penalised because they know can't watch their team play. So that means good fans are going to get penalised. Hopefully, then good fans will start getting angry and say, well, no, that's not right. We don't want these people in our club. And then hopefully, maybe something like that will have a positive effect. Although it might sound a bit negative for the ones that are not watching the game. But I'm not sure if sending that big fine is going to be any effect to a team that's already got loads of millions.
Absolutely.
So 50 grand fine going to do to a club that's got millions of pounds, it's like pocket money to them. That ain't going to deter anyone, is it?
No, absolutely.
I don't think fine is the way, personally.
Yeah, and so in your experience of of being in a game, like how does it affect players? I mean, I think it's difficult for people to sort of to gauge. I think sometimes people.
I've never been in a game. I've never been abused. So I've never heard it. I've never been in it. So I've never experienced it myself. So I wouldn't be one to say I've experienced it, because if I did, I'm not sure what I'd do or how I would do. But if I was abused by an opponent, for example, I'll deal with it there and then. This is me. If someone abused me, an opponent, a fellow professional that was playing against, abused me, I wouldn't be one of the people to go and complain after the game. I wouldn't do that. I'll deal with that there and then. I'll deal with it at half time. I'll deal with that person at the time. I'll say what I've got to say to them and deal with them at the time. That's me personally. I'm not by any means an angry person or aggressive person, but I think that would have to be dealt with at the time. Personally, I couldn't just say, okay, and then go and complain to my manager that he said something to me that I don't like. I'll tell that person right there and then I don't like what you said. That's how I would do it. But I've never had to do that. Like I said, I've never experienced it.
Yeah.
I've never been in the team that's experienced it. So this is just me talking. Maybe I would do that, but like I said, I haven't experienced it. I love the game of football. I think there's so many passionate, great fans. I've been lucky enough to have played in front of, and none of them have abused me. So
Yeah.
you know, I'm a loyalist to football. I'm a loyalist to football in this country. So it's just that I don't like anybody being victimised in any way, shape, or form. To be honest with you, but I haven't felt it myself.
Yeah, no, it's a interesting point. I think that obviously, it's obviously different characters, different people are different in that respect. And I mean, I've had a conversation with some players, and in terms of in sort of confidence, and everyone's different in the way it affects them. Whatever the abuse is for, I mean, it's a number of things really. Different players react differently, and I suppose it's a difficult one because different things affect different people in different ways. But the long and short of it is, for me, I think in a game of football, we're all there to sort of, from the fans' perspective, they're there to enjoy themselves and see the game and enjoy the spectacle. Obviously, if the players aren't, performing, every right to voice their opinion and that sort of stuff. But in terms of that sort of line, I think that's important. That sort of there is education there, and clubs do start enforcing things going forward. But another interesting thing, just out of interest, in terms of the media, in your experience, when you sort of as a player, Michael, what sort of your take on, say, when you listen to the media speak about performances and that sort of stuff? I mean, I think for me, it seems like pundits are more opinionated now than they used to be. Whether that's for TV, I don't know. I would think so. But when you were sort of playing in your pinnacle, did you sort of ever experience pundits talk about your performance, and you sort of turned around and thought differently, or?
No, not really. To be fair,
Yeah.
I mean, when you're always going to get critiqued anyway, and you're saying it's the nature of the business. So whether you play at your local club, they'll have a local newspaper that will write about your performance, or you play at Man United, the whole nation is talking about your performance. So I think, as far as other people's opinions, like I said, that doesn't bother me. Didn't really bother me. I didn't pay too much mind. I remember when I was at Watford, they said I could only play in the hot weather. When it got winter, I didn't used to play very well. I remember that. So I remember, so that again, that didn't affect me. I used to see that as more of a compliment, if anything. Than a negative, if that makes sense. They're recognising that I'm a half decent player. That's all I can do. You understand? So as far as critique and criticism, I think you've got to have a thick skin if people are criticising you or saying something negative about you. I don't think there's much you can do if the media are going over the top. What can you do? I don't think there's much you can do, because if you start reacting to it, that's what they want, really, to be
Absolutely.
And I think the media's got a lot to say now, because there's much more platforms for them to say it on. That's what it is everywhere now. You've got Twitter, you've got all sorts of platforms.
Of course,
where they can talk. Journalists have got their own personal opinions as well now, got their own Twitter accounts and stuff.
Absolutely,
So I don't think that's something you can get away with. As long as you're respectful, I think you just got to deal with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, interesting you say. I mean, you mentioned there social media. I think that sort of obviously played a part in the game too, and that's an interesting one really, because social media sort of come in and sort of it's huge now. A lot of players have got their own sort of social media accounts and that sort of stuff, and that's fair enough. And obviously people can sort of reach a big audience. But in terms of yourself, I mean, did social media, was that coming into the game when you were sort of still in the game, or that was sort of that was one thing that you didn't have to deal with yourself, or what's your take on all this social media thing these days, Micah?
Yeah, no, it was starting to come into the game towards the end, Facebook and stuff like that. Me personally, I'm not into social media. I've got a couple social media outlets, mainly to keep people involved in what I'm doing. More on a business level more than a personal level. So I've never used social media on a personal level. You will never see me post up pictures of myself or my kids or holiday. Nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, but I'm just never been into social media like that. For me, them things are just for family and private stuff. So I just use social media just to basically network. So it's just a networking tool for me, basically. So I was never really into it, but it was starting to get a bit more relevant. I remember there was a thing called BlackBerry pins and stuff like that. So them things they never interest me. So they still don't. So I just used my social media just for networking on the business level.
That's an interesting one, because I remember, like, at the time it was like I was working in the game and full time, and it was, I think it was I don't recall now, it might have been MySpace or something along them lines, and it sort of it hit me out of nowhere when the players were talking about. I thought, what in the world is all this about? But the players are there, and I thought then, at that point, I thought this could eventually, create problems for certain players, because obviously, they're sort of putting everything out there and leaving themselves open, going forward. But these days, it's a big part of people's lives. Everyone's got, like, the Instagram, the Facebook. A lot of people have got that, the young players, and I think there's always that little bit of a concern that it consumes energy, in the sense that, it's one of the things, really, if there's a reaction. I've seen players actually, like, turn their accounts off because they've just got, trolled and that sort of stuff. And, from a young player's point of view, it's one of them, really, where, it could end up being, if not used properly, another distraction for them that they don't need to get in the way of their career in that sense, but obviously, the times move on, and there's little anyone can do about that. But and yourself, I mean, you're coaching at the moment, Mike. You've sort of moved into coaching, and it's about what you're doing as a coach now, or?
Oh yeah, so I'm a QPR now. I was a QPR for the last 4 months, working in the community.
Yeah.
So what he did when I finished playing football, I've done my badges and my licenses, but what I didn't want to do? I didn't want to just be a coach with an A license. I kind of understood that could limit my options.
Yeah.
I kind of understood that I want to be coaching at the highest level possible. I love the game. I love England. I love what the coaches they're giving me. I love what the game's giving me. I just love the game. But I understood maybe after playing, there might be things outside of my control that can stop me getting to where I want to go.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
People like myself, I come from an ethnic minority. Yes, I don't say football's racist. I love the game, but I know there's a ceiling for us as far as going to the next level. So if I want to compete with my peers on the side as a coach or manager, it might not be as easy for me as it was for me when I was actually playing. I understand that. When I'm playing, it's all in my control. I can dominate you. I can do what I want with the football, because everyone can see that I'm okay. Everyone can see that you're better than me. So even playing field. Once I stopped playing, I've kind of looked around, surveyed the environment as far as coaching and managing, and I realised, well, it might be a bit harder for me to do this now, I want to stop. My ambition is to coach and manage at the highest level, because I believe I'm capable of doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm looking around at my peers, I'm looking around at the people that's ahead of me, I'm looking around at the people before me, and I think, there ain't many, is there? I know it lasted long, and furthermore, some of them can't even get a job.
Yeah.
So I decided I need to start doing other things. I need to start aligning my skill sets that I've learned from football and start getting other qualifications that align my skill set. So I've got corporate governance. I'm accredited in corporate governance. I've got qualifications in mental health awareness. I've got qualifications in multi-sports, so not just football. So I started getting other things. I'm educated to deliver, be a teacher. So I've got my petals and stuff like that. So I started doing different qualifications, so that I can do other things other than just be Micah Hyde, ex-footballer with an A license, and I can't get a job. So I started doing other things. So that's what I did.
Tremendous,
As soon as I finished playing football, I went straight to education, started living in the school, started living in football, and I went around and not in a full circle, but where I am now is where I want to be. That's in professional football and trying to educate the youngsters for tomorrow.
Fantastic, and I think it's important. I think it's great that people like yourself who've sort of got some of this experience for the young players. It's a huge benefit for them, and certainly in my experience, I always told the young players, particularly the apprentices, to sort of make the most of whatever comes their way. And I was doing some work last year helping out. I don't want to mention the team, but I was helping some youngsters out with their education, and some of them, Micah, they sort of thought they'd made the promised land. I was like, look, guys, and maybe only 2 of you are going to make it out of this 18. And I'm like, but that's the attitude they had. It was like they thought they'd made it, and it's hard as a young person to see sometimes beyond that. But I think people like yourself who sort of had a career in the game and connecting to them is really important, because from a mentoring point of view, they see someone like yourself who says education is important, and hopefully it resonates, and they think, well, you can be the best player in the world, and you have 10 years at a big club. Every career is going to come to an end, no matter who you are. That's the sort of the difficult thing with professional sport.
That's the reality of professional sport. That is the reality. You might say it's difficult, but if you tell this is the reality, from the beginning, so they're not afraid of the reality.
Exactly.
Then they can affect change. Then they can do something about it. To tell them, it's not the fair. This is reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of these are going to not. So what you got to do is maximise your time, whether in a classroom, whether in on the pitch, wherever it is, whether in a gym. Maximise your time so that you've always got a positive outlook in life. So you've got something to keep going forward to, not just football, because this is what you're doing right now. But if you don't make it, then what?
Exactly.
So this is what I try to do. To be fair, that's very good to get Jimmy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And how do they respond to when you tell them that, Michael? What's their response generally?
No, that's fine. Because you're giving them trust. You're not telling them that and leave them to just fail. You're giving them trust. What you're telling them, you're giving them support. So when I speak to them, I don't go in there and tell them, well, you're not going to make it. It's not like that. You explain to them, every time you play football, maximise your ability. But, football ain't the end-all be of life. It's not the end-all be of life. And if you don't crack it, then you've got to make sure you create positive individuals, independent learners. So this is what I try to tell them. You're an independent learner. You can do what you want. This is where you are at the moment. Maybe if you're a scholar, you've got 2 years to try and achieve what you want. If that doesn't work out, you're still an independent learner, you're still a positive individual, you've still got all these skill sets, you've still got the capability to do what you want. So make sure that you maximise your time. That's what I talk to them. So it's pretty honest, pretty straightforward, but it's always with a support. You're supporting them in their decision making. You're getting them to think about the process of what they're doing instead of telling them what's going to happen. You're just telling them the outcomes. It could go this way, it could go that way. You've got to make sure you give yourself the best opportunity, whatever way it goes. Because you're a young person. So that's how it should be. I believe, because when I was growing up in our generation, it was, well, get on with it.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
Yeah, exactly.
There was none of this. Just get on with it. There was no excuses. There was no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's tremendous, Mike. I'm sort of, conscious of time, and you could carry on speaking forever. Really, it's been a fascinating, having you on the show. It definitely has, and I'm sure the listeners, irrespective of whether they're playing the game or just fans, have had a fascinating insight into the game. But I really want to thank you, Michael, for coming on board the show. It's been tremendous, and I wish you every success in your coaching career. I'm sure that you'll continue to succeed in whatever you do. But thanks for being on the show, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on board, and no doubt we'll speak again at some point.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Take care, mate.
And there you have it, our guest, Micah Hyde, with a refreshingly honest outlook of the game. Professional footballer, really well known for his time at Watford, but obviously played for a number of teams as well. But definitely, I certainly recall him from his time at Watford, and obviously playing international football. And really refreshingly honest outlook on the game, and we covered all things about the game, and I'm sure you really enjoyed listening to that, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and certainly from a perspective of a footballer or any sports person or even a fan, what a great insight into the world of someone who's played at the highest level and embarks in a new career in coaching. Fantastic. So you're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. We've come to the end of the show. It's been a fantastic show. Micah Hyde's been great to have on board. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are this weekend, have a fantastic weekend. And same time, same place next week on the Friday Sports Show, 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio.